A Second Chance at Love. Previous episodes are available in playlist, a link is given in the video description. Episode 41. If there's nothing else, I'm hanging up now. Lucian waited for a moment before preparing to end the call when the two boys did not speak. Mr. Farwell, wait a minute. The boys hurried to stop Lucian after hearing his words. Lucian paused, complying with their request. Cautiously, Benny glanced over at his mother while holding onto Archie's watch. He said, "Mr. Farwell, are you busy at work? If so, you can send Essie to us. We'll take good care of Essie together with Mommy." After uttering the words, Benny waited with bated breath for Lucian's reply. After all, Lucian had rejected their request to go visit Estella just moments ago. Hence, it would not be a surprise if this request was rejected as well. In fact, he's quite likely to reject it. Still, it was worth a try. Maybe Daddy will even agree to it. Roxanne had not expected the boys to come out with their request so suddenly, leaving her feeling anxious. A few moments later, Lucian's voice sounded from the phone. "There's no need. I will stay home and take care of Essie." Without waiting for them to speak, Lucian hung up right away. The boys' mouths were agape for a moment before awkwardly shutting. Then, they turned to look at their mother with woeful expressions. As she was filled with frustration, the light in Roxanne's eyes slowly dimmed. However, she forced herself to smile and gently pat their heads when she saw their crestfallen expressions. "Thank you, my darlings. Don't worry. At least we found out that Essie's all right." The two boys nodded obediently in response. Although they were still worried, they knew if they wore their hearts on their sleeves, their mother would only become sadder. "Anyway, why do you guys have Lucian's phone number?" Roxanne looked at Archie and Benny in confusion. Not only did they somehow have Lucian's phone number, but the latter also did not inquire who the caller was and clearly called out to Archie after picking up the phone. This meant that the three of them had contacted each other before. However, Roxanne had no recollection of Archie ever using his smartwatch to call Lucian. Thus, she concluded that they must have done it behind her back. Suspicion surged within her as the realization hit her. Right then, guilt flashed across their eyes as Archie and Benny realized their mother had caught wind of what they had been up to. Steeling himself, Archie said, "Mr. Farwell gave us his number the day you got drunk. He told us to call him anytime if we needed anything." Roxanne furrowed her brows, trying to recall the time she had gotten drunk and had to be sent home by Lucian. It makes sense if the boys had gotten Lucian's phone number back then. She leaned forward and tousled their hair, chiding them, "Don't disturb him too much." Nodding demurely, Archie and Benny let out sighs of relief inwardly when Roxanne did not pry into the matter further. Roxanne sat with the children in the living room for some time before leaving to prepare their afternoon meal when lunchtime drew near. In the living room, Archie and Benny whispered among themselves. "Archie, is Essie really okay?" Benny asked as he fiddled with his fingers to distract himself. Pressing his lips together, Archie replied solemnly, "I don't know either. Judging from Daddy's tone, Essie didn't seem to be okay." Even if Lucian did not explicitly spell it out for them, they could guess. "Is Essie okay?" Thinking of that, the boys felt sorry for Estella. Alas, Daddy doesn't allow us to visit her, Benny grumbled in a piping voice. Yet, his brother refuted almost immediately, no. It's not that he doesn't allow us to see her. Benny looked at his brother in puzzlement upon hearing that. After glancing in the direction of the kitchen, Archie expounded dejectedly, Daddy just doesn't want Mommy to visit Essie. His words left Benny stunned for a moment. As realization dawned on the latter, his expression instantly changed. I wonder what happened to Daddy and Mommy. Is he still angry about what happened yesterday? But that's just a trivial matter. Even Essie has forgiven Mommy. Meanwhile, Roxanne, who was in the kitchen, felt uneasy as well. Earlier, when she was on the phone with Lucian, she overheard the sound of Estella's sobs. Estella was wailing miserably, and Roxanne even heard the little one uttering her name. At that moment, Roxanne was racked with guilt and full of remorse for the decision she had made. If I had known this beforehand, I would have rushed to her and stayed by her side. I wouldn't even hesitate. Alas, I didn't know Lucian would stop me from seeing Essie. She matters more to me than anything else in the world. Those medicines are nothing compared to her. Mommy, what's that smell? Archie and Benny asked as they walked toward Roxanne. The boys were puzzled to detect a strange smell in the air. As the unpleasant smell seemed to be wafting from a pot, the boys stood on their tiptoes to take a look. However, they were too short to look into the pot. As the boys' voices pulled Roxanne out of her stupor, she lowered her gaze to check the ingredients in the pot. Unfortunately, everything in the pot was fully blackened and burnt. Even the air was permeated with the odor of burnt food. OSH. I've been thinking about Essie all this while and forgotten that I'm cooking. Roxanne hurriedly turned off the stove. She looked apologetic as she looked downward at Archie and Benny. Sorry, Mommy was lost in thought, and the food got burned. We shall head out for lunch. After that, she turned around and took off her apron. Eventually, the three of them went to a restaurant nearby their house. As the trio was still worried about Estella, they did not have much appetite. They had something light for lunch and returned home right after. Mommy, are you tired? Archie and Benny asked as they noticed how absent-minded their mother was. Why don't you go upstairs to get some rest? One of the boys suggested with great concern. Roxanne knitted her brows when she heard that. Although she was indeed tired, she could not help but worry about leaving the children all by themselves. Don't worry, Mommy. We'll take good care of ourselves, the boys reassured with a lovable smile. As Roxanne massaged the bridge of her nose, she uttered softly, all right. Mommy will head upstairs to get some rest. Be good, and stay right here, okay? In truth, she felt totally exhausted after what had happened. After the boys nodded obediently at her in response, she turned around and went upstairs. Her mind was mired in chaos as she locked herself in the bedroom. As she did not feel sleepy, she stared blankly into space while sitting on the bed. However, it wasn't long before she got up and strode toward the study. She thought staying busy with work could keep her out of her inner turmoil. Meanwhile, the little ones downstairs kept quiet until there was no rustling sound coming from upstairs. Archie, let's head to Daddy's house, Benny suggested in a low voice. The little boy looked immensely serious, and his eyes sparkled with anticipation as he spoke. Mommy couldn't even concentrate while cooking. She was also absent-minded when we were eating just now. I'm sure Mommy is very worried about Essie. Since Daddy won't allow Mommy to visit her, the two of us can go, no? We can tell Mommy about Essie's condition after the visit. After giving it some thought, Archie looked toward the room on the second floor with a frown. As usual, the elder child had more to consider before deciding. Mommy is upset and worried about Essie. We shouldn't go out without her knowledge. He'll fly into a panic. As for Benny, he continued to persuade his brother, Essie may still feel uncomfortable when she wakes up. I'm sure she'll feel better if she sees us. On top of that, we can also let her know Mommy is worried about her. Having heard that, Archie was slightly swayed. After some time, he finally came to a decision. Soon, the boys furtively opened the mansion door and ran straight to the roadside. After hailing a cab, they headed to the Farwell residence. Naturally, the cab driver was shocked to see two children getting into his car. After hesitating for a moment, he voiced, "Hello, kids. Where are your parents?" "We're going to our daddy's house. Mommy has given us some cash for the fare," Archie replied in an adorable voice. The driver heaved a sigh of relief upon hearing that. He then started the car and drove toward the boys' destination. They're indeed a pair of silver-spooned kids. This is already a luxurious residential area, but they're heading toward a more pricey neighborhood. Nevertheless, the little ones are sure pitiable. Their parents are already living separately when they're at such a young age. Anyhow, Archie and Benny knew nothing about what the driver was thinking. They were excited and looking forward to seeing their father and Estella. Concurrently, Estella was sleeping in her bedroom at the Farwell residence. When she was woken by the ringtones that rang out a moment ago, she opened her eyes in a daze. "It hurts," Estella could not help but moan in pain as she felt excruciating pain around the eye area. Her voice drew Lucian's attention, and he immediately strode into the room. He furrowed his brows worriedly as he wasn't sure when exactly Estella had woken up. Earlier, James had left the manor in a hurry. He had to attend to some urgent matters after sending them back. Before leaving, James had repeatedly reminded Lucian to pay attention to Estella's emotions. He said that Estella might still be emotionally unstable when she woke up. As the little girl squinted her eyes, she noticed that the person standing at the door was her father. With a woeful expression, she stretched out her hand to him. Lucian hurried forward and scooped her up in his arms. "Are you okay? Do you feel uncomfortable?" Estella touched her eyes gently and uttered softly, "Eyes. They hurt." Frowning, Lucian looked at her eyes only to notice that she had swelling around that area. As the little girl had cried miserably earlier, it made her eyes swell up. In actuality, this happened to Estella quite frequently, even before she met Roxanne. As an autistic child, Estella did not know how to express and manage her emotions. She would always lock herself in the bedroom and cry her eyes out whenever she felt uneasy. As a result, her eyes would always get swollen the next day. As such, Lucian had already gotten used to treating her swollen eyes. After checking her eyes, he carried her down the stairs and applied a cold compress to her eye area. "Mr. Farwell." "Ms. Estella," Catalina greeted them politely. Noticing that Estella's eyes were red and swollen, Catalina could not help but express her concern worriedly. Gosh, that's severe swelling. Estella, who was being held in Lucian's embrace, was grasping the latter's shirt tightly with her tiny hands. Since she had cried herself to sleep, she still felt upset after she woke up. Having heard what Catalina said, the little girl wanted to respond to the former. However, when she opened her mouth, a burp got out, and tears started to well up in her eyes again. Catalina quickly comforted her by saying, "It's okay. Have a good rest, Ms. Estella. I'll massage your eyes for you." Estella nodded aggrievedly and leaned against Lucian's chest. The look in Lucian's eyes was pitch dark when he took a glance at Estella. After a while, Estella finally regained her senses. When she did, she recalled what had happened before she fell asleep. "Daddy, where's Ms. Jarvis?" Estella tugged at Lucian's shirt. "Before I fell asleep, Mr. Lon had told me Ms. Jarvis would come back to see me in a short while." Lucian didn't expect Estella to suddenly mention Roxanne. His gaze turned grim right away, and he didn't know how to answer Estella's question. "If Essie knows Roxanne isn't here because I didn't allow her to come, she's going to become agitated. However, I can't lie to Essie. Is Ms. Jarvis not here yet?" Estella threw Catalina an innocent glance. Thinking about Roxanne's previous 2 visits, Catalina subconsciously glanced at Lucian. At that moment, Lucian was expressionless. Seeing that, Catalina hesitated for a while before shaking her head. "I think Ms. Jarvis is still busy. Wait a while longer, okay, Ms. Estella." Upon hearing that, Estella lowered her gaze in disappointment. "I thought I would see Ms. Jarvis the moment I woke up." "Daddy." Again, Estella tugged at Lucian's shirt sheepishly. Lucian lowered his head and met Estella's gaze. With an innocent expression, Estella asked, "Daddy, could you call Ms. Jarvis? Could you get her to come earlier?" Lucian's gaze darkened as soon as he heard those words. After that, he kept mum. "I want to see Ms. Jarvis," Estella uttered aggrievedly. Lucian patted her head in response and said, "I know." Estella noticed how Lucian had ignored her previous question, so she knew Lucian could still be angry at Roxanne. In an anxious tone, she asked, "Are you still angry at Ms. Jarvis, Daddy? Don't be angry anymore, okay?" "I'd be very sad." While she was talking, she sniffled aggrievedly. Estella really thought Lucian was still angry about what had happened the day before. Lucian merely frowned and remained quiet until he saw that Estella was about to cry. Remembering James' advice, he answered in a deep voice, "I'm not angry anymore." Estella wasn't convinced. "Why is your expression so grim, then?" "That's because I'm worried about you." Lucian forced a smile. Estella didn't dwell too much on it. In fact, she even started consoling Lucian by saying, "Don't be scared, Daddy. I'm fine." After that, she mumbled, "I just want to see Ms. Jarvis, Archie, and Benny." "Daddy, could you send me to Ms. Jarvis? If she's still at work, it's fine. I can wait for her there." Estella knew she would feel better if she could wait at Roxanne's house, for she would be able to see the latter after working hours. "Do you like Ms. Jarvis that much?" Lucian couldn't help but ask. Estella nodded earnestly. As much as I like you, Daddy. Lucian frowned, and his gaze darkened. Why? Estella found that question hard to answer. While furrowing her brows, she tried her best to come up with an answer. In the end, she gave up and shook her head. I don't know. All she knew was that Roxanne was kind to her. Besides, Ms. Jarvis' smell makes me feel safe. Roxanne is here. Estella lowered her gaze discreetly and burrowed into Lucian's embrace. Ms. Jarvis smells so much better than Daddy. Lucian scoffed at the irony of the situation. Essie only likes Roxanne so much because of the bond between a mother and a child. Little did he know, Roxanne was feeling the same about Estella. He thought that Roxanne had chosen her job over Estella. Daddy, don't feel remorseful, okay? Estella remembered the phone call that made her cry. In a sheepish and cute tone, she added, I only want Ms. Jarvis to be my mommy. Upon hearing those words, Lucian was reminded of the phone call, and he went silent for a few seconds after Estella repeated the question. Annoyed, Lucian wanted to refute Estella's words. However, he quickly recalled James' advice. In the end, Lucian took a few seconds to calm himself down. Once he had suppressed his anger, Lucian replied vaguely, I won't marry someone you don't like. Besides, I'm not planning on getting married anytime soon. I only like Ms. Jarvis. Estella's eyes lit up. In other words, the only woman Lucian could marry was Roxanne because Estella wouldn't like any other woman apart from her. A bitter look appeared in Lucian's eyes when he heard that. He didn't expect Estella to respond so swiftly. When Estella said those words, there was a sly look in her eyes as she stared at Lucian. I know. Lucian furrowed his brows helplessly. In other words, he had agreed to Estella's words. Hearing that, Estella finally flashed a smile. While tugging at Lucian's shirt, she urged, Daddy, quick! Pursue Ms. Jarvis. Lucian merely nodded indifferently in response because he couldn't help thinking of the scene where Roxanne was with Jack. Even if I don't want to accept it, it's the truth. Roxanne is no longer the person she was 6 years ago. Now, she's a lot more eye-catching. I'm no longer the only man she sees. Refusing to give up, Estella probed, you know what I mean, right? Estella wasn't going to let the matter slide unless she heard a definitive answer from Lucian. Lucian returned to his senses and heaved a helpless sigh. I'll try. Satisfied, Estella nodded and gradually removed herself from Lucian's embrace. While staring at him sternly, she encouraged, You're the best daddy in the world, Daddy. Ms. Jarvis is also the best mommy in the world. You'll surely be successful in pursuing Ms. Jarvis, Daddy. After all, Archie, Benny, and I will be helping you. Lucian was amused by her words. He could only nod at her since he was rendered speechless. Suddenly, the intercom in the mansion rang. Thinking that Roxanne was there, all three of them looked inquiringly in the door's direction. Catalina subconsciously took a couple of steps toward the entrance, but she turned around to look at Lucian, awaiting his permission. Lucian frowned. If Essie were asleep, I would unhesitatingly tell Catalina to decline the call. However, Essie is awake, and she's staring at the door. Left without a choice, Lucian nodded at Catalina, signaling her to answer the door. If Roxanne's here, I'll let her in. Catalina heaved a sigh of relief and quickly went to answer the intercom. His and her 891. To her surprise, she didn't see anyone on the intercom screen. Who's there? Catalina asked in confusion. After a while, a cute voice rang out, "Hi, Ms. Catalina. We're Archie and Benny. Can we go in to see Essie?" As soon as those words fell, Archie and Benny stood on their toes to show two pairs of eyes on the intercom. Catalina had taken care of Archie and Benny before, so she remembered them well. In fact, Catalina's heart melted a little when she heard their voices. Still, she remembered to turn toward Lucian to get his permission. Seeing that Catalina wasn't responding, Archie and Benny added, "It's just the two of us. Mommy isn't here." Lucian and Estella heard those words loud and clear. Lucian frowned slightly and nodded at Catalina, letting her know it was okay to let the boys in. On the other hand, Estella's expression turned slightly gloomy. "I thought Ms. Jarvis would be here as well. Since Archie and Benny are here, why didn't Ms. Jarvis come to see me?" Seeing that the gates to the manor were slowly opening, Archie and Benny's eyes lit up, and they breathed a long sigh of relief inwardly. They had thought Lucian wouldn't let them in. "Luckily, Daddy let us in." Archie and Benny were holding hands when they ran toward the main entrance. By then, Catalina had already opened the door for them. Archie and Benny ran straight into the living room and saw Estella sitting on Lucian's lap. Archie and Benny suppressed their urges to see Estella straight away and greeted politely, "Hi, Mr. Farwell." Lucian then raised his gaze toward the entrance behind Archie and Benny. Sure enough, he didn't see Roxanne coming through the door. Moments later, Lucian retracted his gaze and nodded at Archie and Benny indifferently. In a deep voice, he asked, "How did you guys get here?" Archie and Benny looked at each other before replying evasively, "We hailed a taxi. The driver was kind to us." In fact, they were right. When they wanted to pay the taxi fare upon arrival, the driver demanded less money because they were kids. He had even waited until the boys got into the manor before leaving. Lucian furrowed his brows when he heard the response. He then rephrased his question. "Does your mommy know you guys are here?" Archie and Benny pretended to feel guilty and asked timidly, "Is it not okay? We were really worried about Essie." With that, the boys looked at Estella, who was sitting on Lucian's lap. Estella felt a lot better after she found out that Roxanne had asked the boys to visit her. She then turned toward Lucian and grabbed his arm. "Daddy, I want to play with Archie and Benny." Lucian patted Estella's head and agreed to it. "Since your mommy knows you guys are here, stay and have fun." With that, Lucian set Estella down. Estella immediately scampered toward Archie and Benny. When she got closer to them, Archie and Benny saw Estella's reddened eyes, and they were heartbroken. Essie must have cried a lot just now. Otherwise, why would her eyes be swollen and reddened? Estella didn't know what was on their minds, so she just grabbed their hands and said, "Let's play upstairs." Archie and Benny nodded before asking for permission from Lucian politely. Seeing that Lucian had nodded back at them in response, they went upstairs with Estella. "I am fine." Lucian watched the kids go up the stairs as a myriad of emotions rushed through him. Just now, Archie and Benny said Roxanne told them to come. She kept calling me throughout the day, but I haven't picked up any of her calls. I thought she would have given up since she knew I was angry. Who would have known that she would use the boys against me? At first, she told the boys to call me. After that, she even told them to come and see Essie. Undeniably, she's gotten smart. However, why didn't she just come when she has already done so much? She knows that I wouldn't refuse her if she were to come with Archie and Benny. Could it be that she's also angry at me? But why should she be? Catalina sensed Lucian's anger and uttered carefully, "Mr. Farwell, I'll send some snacks up for Ms. Estella and the boys." Upon hearing that, Lucian regained his senses. In order to push those thoughts aside, he rubbed his temples forcefully. He then rose to his feet from the couch and uttered in a hoarse voice, "I'll go." Catalina nodded and gave him the plate in her hands. Lucian took the plate and went upstairs. At that moment, Estella, Archie, and Benny were sitting in a circle in Estella's room. "Where's Ms. Jarvis? Is she still busy working?" Estella asked Archie and Benny in her adorable voice. Archie and Benny were stunned for a moment before asking warily, "Who told you Mommy is busy at work?" "Daddy." Even Ms. Catalina said so, Estella answered innocently. Besides, when Lucian called Roxanne earlier in the morning, Estella also heard the latter saying the same thing. That was why Estella thought that was really the case. Upon hearing Estella's response, Archie and Benny exchanged a look before coming up with a white lie. "Mommy has her hands full. That's why she told us to visit you first." The boys could tell that Estella had been crying. If she knows Daddy and Mommy are still arguing, she's going to get emotional again. Estella nodded understandingly before saying in a cheery tone, "Daddy has forgiven Ms. Jarvis." Again, Archie and Benny were stupefied. With mixed feelings surging within their hearts, they only nodded a few seconds later. "It seems like Daddy has told Essie a lot of lies to calm her down. Fortunately, we asked her the question first just now. Otherwise, we would have exposed everything." With that in mind, Archie and Benny both breathed a sigh of relief inwardly. "Are you still feeling unwell?" Archie asked caringly. Estella shook her head in response. "I'm fine. I was just angry at Daddy this morning. However, Daddy has already promised to stop fighting with Ms. Jarvis." Archie and Benny felt relieved when they heard that. "We almost told her the truth accidentally. When will Ms. Jarvis be done with her work?" Estella suddenly asked. Archie and Benny were getting overwhelmed by Estella's continuous questioning. "Well, that depends on when Daddy stops being angry. How would we know when that will be?" Upon being put in a tight spot, Archie and Benny could only stare at each other helplessly. As they were racking their brains to come up with an answer for Estella, someone knocked on the door. Estella retracted her gaze from them and got up to open the door. "Hi, Daddy." Estella smiled and greeted obediently when she saw the person standing at the door. Right then, Lucian was looking right back at her as he stood at the door while holding a plate of snacks and drinks. "I will look for them with you, Mr. Farwell." At the thought that they had almost given their father's lie away earlier, Archie and Benny stood up and greeted Lucian guiltily. Inclining his head a fraction, Lucian swept a dark look over them both. A sense of warning seemingly hit Archie and Benny through the air, upon which the expressions on their faces turned much more docile. They could surmise that he was cautioning them against saying something they shouldn't be saying. Seeing that they had grasped his meaning, Lucian nodded slightly and placed the snacks meant for them on the table. "Just tell Ms. Catalina if you need anything. I'm going to settle some things." All three children bobbed their heads in unison. Without saying anything further, Lucian whirled around and left. He was so absorbed in brooding over Roxanne's thoughts just now that he forgot to remind Archie and Benny to be mindful of their words. For that reason, he offered to do it instead when Catalina said she was going to take some snacks upstairs. Watching as the bedroom door closed once more, Archie and Benny inwardly breathed a long sigh of relief. Phew! Daddy was really scary earlier. Following Lucian's interruption, Estella forgot all about their conversation just now. She proceeded to share the snacks with Archie and Benny. Soon, they all played together while munching on the snacks. The matter about Roxanne was thrown at the back of Estella's mind. Meanwhile, Roxanne had finally forced herself into working mode after much effort. Engrossed in work, she accidentally lost track of time. By the time she came out of the study, it was already growing dark. Recalling the failed lunch at noon, she thought of making it up to Archie and Benny by going downstairs early to prepare dinner. She initially reckoned that they would be playing downstairs, but there were no signs of them when she went to the floor below. "Archie? Benny?" she called in a raised voice, giving their absence little thought. When a while passed without any response, her heart sank. She swiftly went upstairs and peeked into Archie and Benny's room by the door, but they weren't there. Neither were they in the backyard. Only then did she realize that they had left at some point in time. For a moment, sheer panic swamped her. They had just returned to the country not long ago, so she couldn't figure out where Archie and Benny could have gone. After racking her brain for some time, she took a chance and knocked on Madeline's door. Her best friend's house was the only place she could think of where Archie and Benny might have gone. Coincidentally, Madeline was on leave at home. She happened to be napping when she heard the knock, so she was still pretty groggy when she opened the door. "What is it, Roxanne? Are you here to invite me to dinner? I'll pass since I still want to sleep." Having said that, she made to close the door without standing on ceremony with Roxanne. Roxanne, on the other hand, frowned. "Did Archie and Benny come over to look for you?" At that, Madeline screeched to a stop in her tracks, her drowsiness disappearing into thin air. "No. Have they gone missing?" In truth, Roxanne had a sinking suspicion of the answer the moment she laid eyes on her best friend earlier. She only went ahead with that question because she still harbored a shred of hope within her. Her hope finally died when she received Madeline's negative answer. Consequently, her heart sank even further. Realizing that something had happened, Madeline hurried back into the house and snagged a coat, draping it over herself. "I'll look for them with you. Archie and Benny aren't familiar with the environment in the country. I really hope they didn't get lost." Worried beyond words, Roxanne didn't decline the offer. They first searched around the neighborhood. When there were no signs of Archie and Benny, they climbed into the car to look somewhere farther. Unfortunately, they were both at a loss after doing so, for they had no idea where Archie and Benny could have gone. See, what should we do now? Were they wearing their watches when they left? Madeline, who was calmer than Roxanne, asked with a frown. At once, a light bulb went off in Roxanne's mind. At the same time, regret and frustration inundated her. Too many things had happened today that everything else fled my mind when I realized that Archie and Benny had gone missing, leaving panic all that remained. Luckily, I went over to look for Madeline. Following Madeline's reminder, she called Archie and Benny without delay. Alas, Archie didn't answer even after a long while had passed. She then called Benny, but still, no one picked up. As Roxanne and Madeline listened to the ringing tone drifting out of the phone, their hearts sank to the bottom. There were too many reasons that Archie and Benny weren't answering the calls. The worst possibility flashed across their minds. Roxanne dug her nails into her palms to force herself to remain calm. Unlocking her phone, she checked the GPS location of Archie and Benny's watches. Only when she saw the two tiny green dots on the screen did a sliver of relief creep into her. Phew! Fortunately, I can still track them. I'll drive. Likewise, having seen the GPS location, Madeline immediately started the car engine. Roxanne nodded weakly while staring at the two tiny green dots that were seemingly overlapping, not daring to take her eyes off for even a second. Fortunately, the two tiny green dots remained stationary. Thus, they wouldn't have any trouble tracking Archie and Benny down. An inexplicable sense of familiarity flooded Roxanne as she scrutinized the distance between her current location and the tiny green dots. But on second thought, she found that absurd. In her bedroom at the Farwell residence, Estella tilted her head in puzzlement at the sight of Archie and Benny's watches flashing incessantly. It seems that someone is calling you, Archie. Archie glanced at the caller ID before he shook his head guiltily. No, it's just my alarm. After saying that, he hid his wrist away. Mere moments later, Benny's watch started flashing. Similarly, he brushed it off with the same lie. As their watches kept flashing, Archie and Benny exchanged a look brimming with craftiness. Mommy will definitely come looking for us according to our GPS location when we fail to pick up her calls. At that time, she'll undoubtedly meet Mr. Airwall. 20 minutes later, Madeline brought the car to a stop at the gates of the Farwell residence. At the sight of the grand building and door plate above, her expression changed, and she instinctively cast a look at her best friend. Roxanne's expression was far more intriguing. Dear Lord! My mind was truly a mess that I didn't even realize that the GPS location was evidently the Farwell residence. I've always wanted to ask you this, Roxanne. Have Archie and Benny learned of their identities? Madeline couldn't help venturing. The instant Roxanne heard that question, her pupils abruptly constricted. A while later, she shook her head in feigned calmness. No. I've never told them about it. Even Lucian isn't aware of that. They can't possibly have learned the truth ahead of Lucian when even he has no idea about this matter. Helplessness washed over Madeline as she studied her best friend's expression. She could tell that Roxanne couldn't be sure of the answer. Instead, the latter was merely trying to convince herself. Nonetheless, she didn't plan on saying anything further to put more pressure on her best friend since the latter seemed weighed down with troubles. She merely queried, "So, what should we do now?" Hearing that, Roxanne lifted her eyes and stared at the manor gates. A glimmer of exasperation flittered across her eyes. It's all too clear that Archie and Benny deliberately didn't pick up my calls, intending for me to hunt them down. But right now, I've got no other choice. Go home first. I'll go in and have a look at things, Roxanne murmured apologetically. Turning, she opened the car door and alighted from the vehicle. How is she doing? It wouldn't be appropriate for Madeline to poke her nose into Roxanne and Lucian's relationship, so she ultimately turned around and drove off after a moment's hesitation. Roxanne watched until the car had gone far into the distance before she pivoted and rang the manor's doorbell. This is already the third time today. I wonder if I can get in this time. In the mansion, Archie and Benny had Catalina stay in the room and play with them. As such, the latter didn't hear the doorbell downstairs. Conversely, it was exceedingly quiet in Lucian's study, so he could distinctly hear the sounds from downstairs. When the doorbell continued ringing even after a while had passed, he stepped out of the room for a look. Catalina's voice drifted out of Estella's bedroom. He didn't bother interrupting them, going downstairs and switching on the video intercom instead. "Cat," Roxanne habitually greeted Catalina, but no sooner had the first syllable fallen than she made out the person on the screen. Her voice suddenly tapered off. In the mansion, Lucian's eyes darkened frightfully. Sensing the change in his mood, Roxanne furtively clenched her fists and started, "I saw that Archie and Benny are here, so I came." A slight frown marred Lucian's countenance. "Indeed, they're here." While he was saying that, a hint of bemusement flashed across his eyes. "What trick is she up to now? She instructed Archie and Benny to come over, and now she wants to use that excuse to gain entry." At his affirmative answer, Roxanne breathed a sigh of relief. "Sorry, they must have given you much trouble, hey? Can you please tell them I'm here to pick them up and will be waiting for them at the gates?" Because she had been refused entry twice in the morning, she was very cautious when she spoke. In fact, she didn't even request to be allowed into the house. Again, Lucian's eyes darkened. He didn't bother saying anything but raised his hand and pressed a button on the screen. A few seconds passed. Just when Roxanne was about to press him for a reply, the gates slowly opened. On the heels of that, Lucian's low and deep voice rang out unhurriedly. "I haven't got the time, so you should talk to them yourself, Ms. Jarvis." When he said that, he turned the video intercom off right away. Roxanne mulled over the meaning of the man's remark for some time before she hesitantly walked in. By the time she reached the mansion's door, she saw that it was already open. Her heart clenched for no apparent reason, and she reflexively treaded lighter. As soon as she stepped into the house, she was greeted by the sight of Lucian sitting on the couch. "Thank you, Mr. Farwell," she stated in an aloof tone while lowering her eyes. She initially thought that he wouldn't say anything, but his voice unexpectedly rang out once more in the next heartbeat. "What for?" Roxanne wasn't sure whether it was merely her imagination, but Lucian's voice was seemingly tinged with a trace of scorn. A mixture of emotions brewed within her, and her gaze flickered. "For allowing me entry." After saying that, she lifted her eyes to him and inquired hopefully, "Can I go and look in on Essie? How is she doing?" The moment her words fell, Lucian's expression visibly darkened. Following that, Roxanne's heart sank to rock bottom. I'm pretty sure you know why you were denied entry today, Ms. Jarvis. Lucian's voice was cold and indifferent. At that, Roxanne balled the hands hanging by her sides into loose fists. Indeed, I know the reason. But I already know what I did wrong, and I'd like to make amends. Regretfully, he obviously doesn't intend on giving me that opportunity. In the meantime, Lucian continued mocking, it looks like you've learned quite a few tricks while you're with Mr. Damaris, Ms. Jarvis. That comment of his had Roxanne's brows knitting together and her eyes brimming with perplexity. A hint of wariness. Slowly getting to his feet, Lucian pinned a dark look on Roxanne, who stood at the door. I really don't know when you learn to use your kids to set me up, Ms. Jarvis. Roxanne's eyes flickered, her gaze mystified. When had I ever done such a thing? Glimpsing the innocent expression on her face, Lucian frowned and started to head in her direction slowly. The instant Roxanne noticed his intentions, her heartstrings drew taut, and she backed away warily. Throughout it all, she kept a distance from him. Why are you drawing away if you're not feeling guilty, Ms. Jarvis? Lucian sneered. Upon hearing that, Roxanne hesitantly stopped retreating, her brows furrowing imperceptibly. I don't know what you're talking about. His gaze gloomy, Lucian demanded lowly, don't tell me it wasn't because you were sure I wouldn't ignore the kids' calls that you had Archie phone me, Ms. Jarvis. Again, Roxanne clenched her hands by her sides and remained silent. It's true that I did such a thing, but how was that considered setting him up? In fact, it was nothing compared to the methods he used against me previously. Lucian's eyes narrowed dangerously. Since you knew full well that I wouldn't deny you entry with the kids present, Ms. Jarvis, why didn't you come with them instead? When he spoke of that, he swept a probing gaze over her, his voice low and terse. Subsequently, he continued, or did you take advantage of the interval to handle some work with Mr. Damaris, Ms. Jarvis? In a seemingly inadvertent manner, he placed extra emphasis on the word work. By the time his words fell, he was already standing before Roxanne. At his words tinged with sarcasm, Roxanne was reminded of her anxiousness that entire day and frowned deeply. A faint spark of anger started blazing in the depths of her eyes. I wonder what kind of important work you've still got with Mr. Damaris, Ms. Jarvis. Lucian stared down at the woman in front of him, his voice going even lower when he clocked the fury in her gaze. Forcibly suppressing the rage within her, Roxanne dipped her eyes and masked all the emotions within them. Our matters have nothing to do with you, Mr. Farwell. Please help me get Archie and Benny down. At the bland detachment in her voice, Lucian mistakenly thought he had hit the nail on the head. Immediately, the fury within him flared into an inferno. Roxanne waited for a while with her eyes lowered. When the man before her remained passive, she made to circle around him. Admittedly, I was in the wrong, but I only wronged Essie. I don't think I owe him anything. Thanks to the hindrances from him throughout the day, she was already bone-tired from worrying about Estella. Thus, she really hadn't the energy to bicker with him then. Since he's unwilling to help me out, I'll go upstairs by myself. However, she had only taken a step when Lucian grabbed her wrist. Halting in her tracks, she uttered in a cool voice, "Please let go of me, Mr. Farwell. Alas, the grip of the hand grasping her wrist merely tightened following her request. Pain shot through her, and her brows gradually creased. The look in her eyes as she regarded Lucian also carried a hint of wariness. "What are you doing?" Lucian had anger written all over his face. "What are you being guilty about? Could it be that you were still settling so-called work matters with Jack despite claiming that you were worried about Essie?" Left with no other choice, Roxanne turned back and met the man's gaze with a frown. "Since you don't believe me, Mr. Farwell, you can ask Archie and Benny what I did in the afternoon. There's no need for you to be so adamant about getting an answer from me." Upon hearing her reply, Lucian snorted. "Was it not you who arranged for Archie and Benny to come over?" "Ha! She arranged for the two boys to come and placate Essie first while she spent the time with Jack." As that possibility occurred to him, the temperature around him plummeted frightfully. "Do you find Essie all too easy to fool, Ms. Jarvis?" Roxanne, on the other hand, merely found him unreasonable. "I can't do anything about it if you insist on thinking so, Mr. Farwell." After saying that, she struggled vigorously, hoping to go upstairs to get Archie and Benny down. "He has already made up his mind about things, so it'd be futile no matter what I say further." Verily, she didn't want to waste any more time. Instead, she wanted to see Estella sooner. Sensing her aversion, the rage in Lucian's eyes blazed all the hotter. It was some matter related to Heartbreak group, right? At that remark, Roxanne abruptly stilled, shock flashing across her eyes. All this while, Jack and Colby had been hinting to her that the trouble in Heartbreak group was Lucian's doing. Although she harbored some suspicions, she had been persuading herself not to simply draw conclusions before having any evidence. However, Lucian's tone at that moment had the scales within her start tilting. So, he has always known about the problems plaguing Heartbreak group. In the next second, Lucian verified her conjecture expressionlessly. "If so, I'd advise you two to stop wasting your time and energy. Sooner or later, Heartbreak group will belong to Farwell group." As his words rang out, his eyes glinted dangerously. Due to her utter shock, Roxanne's struggles gradually ceased. Self-deprecation filled her eyes at the man's definite tone. Why exactly did I still convince myself not to doubt him when Jack and Colby had already made things so clear? Besides, Farwell Group is the only one with the motive and ability to do that in the whole of Horrington. As expected of you, Mr. Farwell. Your methods in the business world are truly astounding. She corralled her thoughts even as her gaze dimmed and her lips curved into a self-deprecating arc. Perceiving the peculiarity in her words, Lucian frowned. "You might as well just say it bluntly if you find my methods despicable, Ms. Jarvis." To him, the business world was no different from the battlefield. If a method guarantees a win, then it's a good one. Furthermore, I want to take this chance to teach Jack a lesson and warn him not to approach my woman. That aside, I intend to wake her up and have her consider carefully whether her work or the kids are more important." Roxanne lifted her eyes and held his gaze. "I merely want to know one thing: why are you doing this?" When her words drifted into the air, Lucian derisively arched a brow. As Heartbreak Group dared to breach their contract with Farwell Group naturally has to teach it a lesson. Hearing that, Roxanne surreptitiously breathed a sigh of relief. Jack's words back then really left me feeling very much worried. Fortunately, Lucian's reason is in line with my thoughts. Why did you think I'm doing this, Ms. Jarvis? Lucian's voice echoed in her ears once more. Roxanne's expression froze for a heartbeat, but in the next second, she remarked in feigned calmness, I just find such a method rather disgraceful for Farwell Group. Having said that, she forcibly suppressed the guilt within her and turned her head to the side nonchalantly. Lucian swept a scrutinizing gaze over her face, but she averted her face. Force herself to calm down. As long as I find a method effective, it isn't considered despicable, Lucian riposted coldly after a while, putting away the scrutiny in his eyes. Her eyes flickering, Roxanne nodded self-deprecatingly. Oh well, I'm not far-sighted enough. Lucian stared at her thoughtfully. Out of the blue, he offered in a much gentler tone than earlier, if it's to your liking, I can retain you as the technical advisor of Heartbreak Group. Upon hearing that, Roxanne snapped her head around with a frown, meeting his gaze in puzzlement. He was absolutely livid just now, but he's now extending me an olive branch in the blink of an eye. Is this considered a chance for me to salvage things? At that thought, mirth bubbled within her. Meanwhile, Lucian's hand tightened around her wrist when he received no answer from her even after a long time had passed. Farwell Group can likewise give you the same resources as Damaris Group. Roxanne could sense that the surrounding temperature was gradually dropping. Her heart inexorably sank as well. After calming herself for a few seconds, she declined in feigned calmness, No, thank you. There are many doctors far more outstanding than me. Considering Farwell Group's financial capabilities, you can unquestionably choose someone of greater repute to take this position. She only agreed to be Heartbreak Group's technical advisor back then because of their project. But then, Heartbreak Group wouldn't have anything to do with Damaris Group's project anymore if it ended up being acquired by Farwell Group. In other words, there was no need for her to get involved further. However, to Lucian, he felt that she chose Jack when given a choice between him and the latter. Following that thought, a murderous rage enveloped him, and a storm brewed in his eyes. What if I insist? At that, Roxanne's brows furrowed. There are some things Farwell Group can't give me. Don't coerce me. No sooner had her words fallen than the man suddenly drew closer to her. In a flash, they were practically standing toe to toe. Roxanne instinctively took a step back. Little did she know that she had already retreated to the edge of the door by an inch. That single step placed her right against the wall behind her. On reflex, she turned and glanced at her back. When she turned back again, Lucian had already stepped forward, bringing them so close that they could sense each other's breaths. Her eyes went wide in panic, and she lifted her hands to push him away. What are you doing? Let go of me. Alas, Lucian effortlessly caught her outstretched hands. In a trice, he had restrained both her hands and pinned them above her head. He stared at her with a smoldering look in his eyes. I gave you a chance. Right after saying that, he leaned toward her. Having no retreat left, Roxanne could only watch helplessly as the man's face drew closer to her. The instant their noses collided, she unconsciously rambled. Before she could gather her wits about her, a warm sensation grazed her lips. Struggling wildly, she wanted to protest, but Lucian shot a hand out and grasped her chin. She was forced to open her mouth, yet she couldn't utter a complete sentence. As the man's kiss grew increasingly intense, his breath brushing against her face turned all the hotter. Tensed and panicked, Roxanne bit his lip hard. In the next moment, Lucian grunted. Clapping a hand over the corner of his mouth, he backed away from her. They looked at each other in silence for a long while, different emotions brewing in their eyes. Lucian stared at Roxanne with a hand over his bleeding lip, his gaze scorching and tinged with a hint of darkness that had yet to fade. On the contrary, Roxanne dug her nails into her palms to force herself to calm down. Threw herself into her arms. I'll go and pick Archie and Benny up. An indeterminate time passed before Roxanne lowered her eyes and murmured that in feigned calmness. She really had no idea how to face the man in front of her, so she could only pretend as though nothing had happened earlier. At the sight of her blasé look, Lucian quirked his lips, deliberately baring the wound at the corner of his mouth. Out of her peripheral vision, Roxanne glimpsed the corner of the man's mouth. Her expression turned awkward. Lucian proceeded to dab at the corner of his mouth. By then, his gaze had already cooled. In a deep voice, he offered, "I'll bring you upstairs." Arg! I was again irritated by her just now and lost hold of my self-control for a moment. And now, she has aversion etched across her features. Fury and annoyance simmered within him, but in the end, they all turned into indifference. Reaching a tacit consensus, neither of them mentioned a single word about the incident just now. Lucian spun on his heel and headed upstairs. Similarly, Roxanne followed behind him without a word. Neither said anything until they arrived in front of Estella's bedroom door. In the room, the three children had gotten somewhat tired from playing and were sitting in a circle, munching on snacks. "I need to go downstairs to prepare dinner." Catalina felt exceedingly gratified after watching them play the entire afternoon. Since it was almost time for dinner, she planned to go downstairs. Upon hearing that, Archie and Benny exchanged a glance. They both felt a touch perplexed. "Why isn't Mommy here yet when a long time has passed? Don't tell me she hasn't realized that we're at Daddy's place." If she didn't look at the GPS position, she must be in a total panic right now. While unease haunted them, Catalina turned around and opened the room door. At once, she caught sight of the two people standing by the door. "Mr. Farwell." Then, she shifted her gaze to the woman beside Lucian. A pause ensued before she greeted, "Ms. Jarvis." Forcing a smile, Roxanne inclined her head at Catalina. "I'm here to pick Archie and Benny up." When Catalina's gaze swept over the couple's lips, shock flittered across her eyes. But still, she quickly retracted her gaze nonchalantly and shifted her body sideways to make way for them to enter the room. "They're in the room." Nodding slightly, Roxanne lifted her eyes and cast her gaze into the room. Archie and Benny had scrambled up and sprinted to the door as soon as Catalina's voice had rung out. Right then, they were both staring at the couple intently. The instant they glimpsed the mark on the corners of both adults' lips, understanding dawned upon them, and they rejoiced inwardly. No wonder Mommy took such a long time to come upstairs. This is why. Sensing their gazes, Roxanne couldn't help feeling guilty. Just when she was about to explain herself, Estella's juvenile voice split the air. "Ms. Jarvis!" In the next second, the little girl threw herself into her arms. Roxanne instinctively caught her. She had been worrying about Estella for the entire day, so she naturally had to check the ladder over carefully when she was right in front of her then. At that thought, she cautiously crouched and looked straight into Estella's eyes. Meanwhile, Estella had waited for Roxanne for the entire day, even bracing herself for the possibility of not getting to see her. Thus, she was over the moon to see Roxanne there all of a sudden. There were no signs of sorrow on her face. Instead, she beamed from ear to ear. Yet, Roxanne noticed the redness and swelling that hadn't abated around her eyes. Immediately, a stab of pain assailed her. "Sorry, I'm late." She caressed Estella's head remorsefully. In response, Estella shook her head hard with innocence written all over her face. "You had Archie and Benny visit me instead." Behind her, Archie and Benny hung their heads low and furtively inched closer to each other when they heard that. "Do not need to do so." Lifting her eyes, Roxanne glanced at Archie and Benny. Sensing her stare, Archie and Benny raised their eyes guiltily and flashed her a smile before averting their gazes nonchalantly. A strange feeling welled within Roxanne. Gradually, realization dawned upon her. No wonder Lucian asked me such a question earlier. It turned out that they used my name to come and visit Essie. That understanding had a sense of exasperation inundating her. But ultimately, she didn't say anything. Well, they only did so because they really wanted to come here and visit Essie. Besides, I'm pretty sure Essie's mood only lifted because they came. "Are you still feeling unwell anywhere now?" Roxanne regarded Estella in concern. In response, Estella shook her head docilely and replied in a cute voice, "Archie and Benny played with me." At that, Roxanne knew that her conjecture was right. Relief suffused her. "Why did you come so late, Ms. Jarvis? Have you just finished your work?" Estella inquired, concerned about her instead. Hearing that, Roxanne abruptly recalled Lucian's question when they were downstairs just now. For a moment, she didn't quite know how to answer Estella. Fortunately, Estella didn't really need an answer from her. She merely urged thoughtfully, "Don't tire yourself out, Ms. Jarvis. You've got to take good care of yourself." Touched by her innocence, Roxanne nodded emotionally and her eyes moved. "Okay, I will. Won't you allow me to check you over?" Following that, Estella obediently stretched her hand out. Taking her wrist, Roxanne took her pulse. While she couldn't diagnose Estella's mental condition, she could still check her physical condition. Only then, she would be at ease. After checking the little girl over and ascertaining that everything was fine, she breathed a sigh of relief. "It's late, so I've got to bring Archie and Benny home. We'll come and visit you again another day, okay?" Roxanne stroked Estella's head before she slowly straightened up. She couldn't bear to part with the latter, but she was all the more averse to facing the man behind her, especially after the incident a while ago. At that remark, Estella, who was still smiling a minute earlier, promptly withered. She gazed at Roxanne pitifully. Behind them, Lucian's gaze darkened frightfully. Well, well, well. Despite seeing that Essie cried her eyes out because of her, she still has no qualms about leaving at the drop of a hat. In a flash, the atmosphere between everyone there turned tense. Catalina alternated her gaze between them. Then, she bit the bullet and tried to smooth things over. I'm just going to prepare dinner. Stay and have dinner with us, Ms. Jarvis. After saying that, she was afraid that Roxanne would decline, so she added, Archie and Benny must be hungry as well. Archie and Benny bobbed their heads cooperatively. Seeing that, Roxanne hesitated for a few seconds. But in the end, she still hardened her heart and turned the offer down. Thank you, but I think I'd best bring them home for dinner. Considering the incident earlier, if I were to stay for dinner, Lucian might misunderstand. Moreover, he hadn't said anything despite being the master of this manor, so there isn't any reason for me to accept the invitation. In truth, Lucian had expected that answer from her. Nonetheless, he still couldn't help feeling chagrined. If you're declining because of Heartbreak Group, Ms. Jarvis, you really don't need to do so. Roxanne was promptly stunned, and a myriad of emotions brewed within her. He clearly knows why I turned the dinner invitation down, yet he accused me of mixing business and pleasure. Now that the kids hear him, they'll likely feel that I'm the one at fault. His and her 901. Accepted readily. Roxanne frowned imperceptibly, not quite sure how she should refute that for a moment. In front of her, Estella grew all the more aggrieved when she didn't only decline the dinner invitation but was also not responding to her father's comment after such a long time. Are you mad at Daddy, Ms. Jarvis? She gingerly tugged on Roxanne's sleeve. Jolted out of her thoughts by Estella's voice, Roxanne regarded the little girl before her with mixed emotions. Estella sniffled, feeling utterly miserable. Although she had no idea what Heartbreak Group Lucian was speaking of, she could tell that the two adults were at odds again. Daddy has finally forgiven Ms. Jarvis, but now she is mad at him. At that thought, she lifted her eyes and glowered at her father in aggravation and ire. Meeting her gaze, Lucian put away some of the displeasure on his face and said nothing further. Roxanne was silent for a moment before she patted Estella on the head in consolation. No, I just don't want to trouble Ms. Catalina. It's just a matter of preparing 2 more dishes, so it's no trouble. I'll go about it right away, Catalina hastily interjected with a smile. At that, Roxanne choked, for she hadn't yet decided to agree and was merely coaxing Estella. Unexpectedly, Archie and Benny's voices had already rung out before she could open her mouth. It's been ages since we last had your cooking, Miss Catalina. We'd like to eat your signature meatballs. Beaming, Catalina readily agreed. Archie and Benny's remark was tantamount to an acceptance of the dinner invitation. That aside, Catalina had already gone downstairs to prepare dinner. In the end, Roxanne swallowed the demurral on the tip of her tongue and went along with Archie and Benny's decision. Throughout it all, Lucian didn't utter a single word further. However, it was still his house. For that reason, Roxanne got up after deliberating for a long while and murmured, "Sorry for troubling you, Mr. Farwell." Lucian shot her an unfathomable look before he went into his study without saying a word. There was still some time before dinner. Roxanne didn't know what to do, so she played with the 3 children in the room for a while. Only when Catalina came upstairs to call them did she lead the trio downstairs. She initially thought that Lucian wouldn't be eating with them, considering his attitude earlier. To her surprise, the man descended the stairs no sooner had they taken their seats. He sat down across from her. "Ms. Catalina's grilled fish is really delicious, Ms. Jarvis." Estella took a piece of fish for Roxanne, snapping her back to reality. Smiling, Roxanne thanked her. "Thank you, Essie." Estella flashed her a docile smile in return. Then, she took a piece of fish for Lucian. Inclining his head a fraction, Lucian remained silent. Imitating Estella, Archie and Benny took some food for their mother before timidly glancing at Lucian at the side. Discerning their intention, Lucian reflexively stole a glance at the woman sitting across from him. Thereafter, he quirked his lips at them in assent. In the next second, Archie and Benny took some food for him, one after another. Lucian accepted readily. Roxanne, on the other hand, gaped at her two children, the emotions in her eyes turning increasingly complicated. Madeline's question before she stepped foot into the manor earlier echoed in her ears. Could it be that they've really learned about their relationship with Lucian? But even so, their attitudes toward their biological father shouldn't be such. I remember that they were exceedingly averse whenever the topic of their biological father came up. Hence, they wouldn't be treating him so nicely right now. Following that thought, she felt that she was overthinking things. Forcibly suppressing the thoughts running through her mind, she lowered her eyes and started eating. "I will bring you camping." Roxanne didn't want to tarry after dinner, so she took her leave with Archie and Benny. "Can't you play with me for a while longer, Ms. Jarvis?" Estella clutched at the hem of her shirt with all the reluctance in the world. Leaning down, Roxanne stroked her head and cajoled gently, "It's late, so I've got to go home." After saying that, she added in a moment of weakness at the sight of Estella's reluctant expression, "I'll come and keep you company another day." She merely wanted to comfort the little girl, but the latter unexpectedly took it seriously. "When will that be?" Estella gazed at her pitifully with solemnity written all over her face. Upon hearing that, Roxanne was inexorably stunned for a while. "When will that be?" On instinct, she lifted her eyes, and in the past, Lucian would speak up and help her defuse the situation. But this time, he acted as though he didn't notice her predicament. In that instant, Roxanne couldn't quite bring herself to tell Estella the truth as she stared into her hopeful gaze. Meanwhile, Estella continued in utter ignorance, "Archie and Benny told me that you often bring them out to have fun. Can I tag along, Ms. Jarvis?" Roxanne's eyes flickered, and alas, Archie and Benny promptly seconded at the side, "Let's go camping together next week. That'll be fun." Back when they were abroad, Roxanne always brought them camping with her colleagues from the research institute whenever she was free, and when Estella heard that, the anticipation within her soared, and her eyes shone brightly. As Roxanne looked at her seemingly sparkling eyes, she simply couldn't bring herself to turn her down. T was incredibly delightful. Felt downright confessy, Ms. Jarvis is very busy with work, so she probably has no time. Out of the blue, Lucian's scornful voice drifted at his words. Roxanne's pupils constricted. Snapping her eyes up, she glared at the man in front of her with an absurd look in her eyes. "I found it unnecessary to explain his misunderstanding toward me earlier, but I never thought that he'd remember it for so long and even mock me. At that, the light in Estella's eyes dimmed, and she dipped her eyes in disappointment. Helplessness deluged Roxanne as she eyed them both. She had no other choice but to suppress the disgruntlement within her and first coax Estella. "I promise I'll bring you camping with Archie and Benny next week." It wasn't until then that Estella raised her head once more. But still, skepticism lingered in her eyes. Archie and Benny hurriedly chimed in, "Mommy never lies." Estella had always trusted them unconditionally, so the smile entered her eyes again since they had said as much. Bobbing her head obediently, she held her little finger out at Roxanne. Roxanne was startled for a moment, not quite sure what Estella wanted to do. "A pinky promise," Estella urged in her cute voice. At that, understanding dawned upon Roxanne. She found it rather amusing, yet her heart melted at the same time. A moment later, she held her little finger out and hooked it around Estella's outstretched finger in a pinky promise. Only then did Estella relax completely. "It's late, so I'll be going home with Archie and Benny first. Rest earlier, Essie." Before leaving, Roxanne bid her farewell with a smile. Waving at her obediently, Estella saw them off. Lucian stood behind her silently with a dark and indecipherable gaze as he watched Roxanne, Archie, and Benny disappear into the distance. Glanced at the man across from her, telling him with her eyes that she didn't really mean it. "Do not be mad anymore, Daddy." When Roxanne, Archie, and Benny had disappeared from sight, Estella lifted her eyes and stared at her father. At her voice, Lucian slowly retracted his gaze and lowered his eyes to meet her gaze. "Yes." Puffing up her cheeks, Estella demanded in a huff, "Did you make Ms. Jarvis mad again?" Tonight, Ms. Jarvis didn't talk much to him. No matter how hard Archie, Benny, and I tried, she hardly glanced in his direction. Following that line of thought, frustration swamped her. He has already promised me that he'd forgive her and never make her mad again, but he didn't keep his word. Discerning her thoughts, Lucian frowned and was just about to answer when he abruptly remembered James' advice in the next heartbeat. Thus, he went silent for a few seconds before replying, "We have some conflicts at work." As soon as Estella heard the word conflicts, her face fell. Lucian regarded her with his brows furrowed. "Both of us have to work, so it's inevitable that we have conflicts at work. You must understand that." Nevertheless, Estella scrunched her face in anger. "But why must you bring home your conflicts at work?" Her question had words eluding Lucian. "Could it be that you haven't forgiven Ms. Jarvis?" Estella was all dubious. When Lucian heard that she was placing the blame on him, his brows creased. Some time passed before his lips twitched cryptically, and he asserted, "You know I never bring work stress home." Blinking hesitantly, Estella solemnly cast her mind back to the past. "That seems to be true indeed. He's very busy, but he's still exceedingly patient with me every time he returns home." So, was it Ms. Jarvis who brought work stress home? She couldn't understand why adults couldn't draw a line between work and private life, much less fathom the fact that the person who did so was none other than Roxanne. But even then, she's always in the right. Adamantly siding with Roxanne, she furiously shot daggers at her father. "Even so, you've got to coax her." Dumbstruck, Lucian felt utterly exasperated. "I've already spelled things out, but she's still siding with Roxanne. Meanwhile, Roxanne hailed a taxi by the roadside and brought Archie and Benny home. She was really exhausted after interacting with Lucian earlier, so she didn't speak much throughout the drive. However, Archie and Benny thought that she was angry at them. Thus, they looked at each other guiltily. Benny tugged at Roxanne's shirt pitifully. "Mommy! Don't be mad anymore, okay?" Hearing that, Roxanne forcefully perked up and met their gazes in puzzlement. "We shouldn't have sneaked out and made you worry," Benny whispered in apology with his head penitently hung low. The instant Roxanne heard that, she inexorably recalled Lucian's words earlier. "I can understand that they sneaked out, but I really can't fathom why he framed it as a deliberate ploy on my part." That thought, a headache started assailing her. Conversely, Archie and Benny thought that she was livid, so they gave explanation after explanation. "We only went to see Essie because we were really worried about her. Besides, we were afraid that she'd be even sadder when she didn't see you upon waking up, so we wanted to make her happy." "Did you have another fight?" Roxanne could tell that the children were getting anxious, so she did her best to suppress her emotions. "I'm not mad. In fact, I want to thank you for comforting Essie." Even though the kids' actions did cause a misunderstanding with Lucian, Oxon knew Estella's mood would not have improved had it not been for them. The children breathed a sigh of relief after hearing their mother but remained somewhat cautious. "Sorry, Mommy. We won't run off by ourselves again," promised Archie after crawling into her embrace. Despite how dim the light in the car was, the exhaustion on Roxanne's face was plain to see. The boy was convinced that he did not do anything wrong before, but at that moment, he was filled with guilt. Benny, too, crawled into his mother's arms and apologized. Then, Roxanne gave her children a big hug before patting them on the head. "I know you were just worried about Essie." In response, the kids nodded in agreement because they were indeed concerned about Estella. However, they also had another reason they dared not tell Roxanne. On the way home, Roxanne could not help but tense up when she saw from afar that the lights in the mansion were on. After reaching the door, Roxanne was about to ask the children to stay there while she went inside to have a look when someone suddenly turned the doorknob from the other side. "You're finally back." Madeline felt as if a huge weight had been lifted off her shoulders when she saw the three. After leaving the Farwell residence, she went straight to Roxanne's house and waited for them to return. The truth was that Madeline could not stop worrying about the two little ones. Roxanne, too, was relieved to see her best friend at her house, and following that was a burst of emotions. Aunt Madeline greeted the boys, puzzled by the woman's appearance since they had no idea what had happened. With a serious face, Madeline lowered herself so she could look the boys in the eye. "Let me see if you're okay." Only after confirming that the children were not injured in any way did Madeline start scolding them. "Do you know how worried you made your mother and me this afternoon? You're not to run off again without telling us. Do you understand? If you must, at least inform your mother." The boys did not know their mother had asked Madeline to help search for them until they heard that, so they quickly lowered their heads and apologized. "We're sorry, Aunt Madeline. We will do that next time." Glaring reproachfully at the two children, Madeline uttered, "It's a good thing you had those watches on you. Remember to keep them on always, okay?" To that, the kids quickly nodded. Only after scolding the children did Madeline rise to look at her friend, whom she could not help worrying about when she saw how exhausted the woman was. What happened? Are you and Mr. Farwell? Madeline wanted to ask if Roxanne and Lucian had a fight but stopped because she suddenly remembered the two boys were beside her. Knowing what her friend wanted to ask, Roxanne smiled and pretended as if everything was okay. No. I'm just really tired today. Madeline then gave Roxanne a suspicious look but decided not to overthink the situation. After all, searching for and worrying about two lost kids was a taxing affair. Even though Madeline had no idea what had happened at the Farwell residence, she was sure it took a lot out of Roxanne. Still, Madeline did not ask about it in the end, and since it was already late, she decided to take her leave. Roxanne was drained, so she went to bed early that night. The next morning, Roxanne was woken up by her ringing phone. She then forced her eyes open to check the time and realized there were 10 minutes left before her alarm went off at 7. Wondering what the phone call was about, Roxanne sat up to wake herself further before answering the call. "What's up, Dr. Galloway?" "The research institute is on fire," exclaimed Colby nervously. Roxanne was completely awake the moment she heard that. "I'll be right over. Hear me out first. I've already contacted the fire department, so the firefighters are on their way," added Colby. However, Roxanne did not hear that because she had already hung up. After washing up, she rushed to the institute without even putting any makeup on. Roxanne would hate for anything to happen to the medicinal herbs she had just placed there the day before. Now that Herbscape Group has been seized, it'll be difficult to find a medicinal herb supplier again if I lose those medicinal herbs. With that thought in mind, Roxanne anxiously sped up her car. The firefighters were already doing their best to put out the fire when she arrived at the scene. "You're here," greeted Colby, who hurried over to Roxanne as soon as he saw her. After nodding in response, Roxanne had her eyes fixed on the location on fire. "What's the situation now? Did they find out what caused the fire?" Not only was the institute filled with many medicinal herbs, but it also had numerous flammable materials. Hence, those working there had always been vigilant with fire prevention efforts. Roxanne had never heard of any fire incident involving the institute, so she wondered how the fire could have started. Colby had a strange look in his eyes before he quickly put his thoughts aside and pretended to be collected. "We haven't got the time to investigate yet. I came in early today and was surprised to smell something burning inside when I was unlocking the door. The fire was already burning vigorously when I got in, so I quickly called the fire department before calling you." After the explanation, Colby ventured a guess with furrowed eyebrows. "It's probably caused by a misplaced item. I should have checked everything before leaving yesterday." When Roxanne saw how Colby blamed himself for the incident, she suppressed her anxiousness to comfort him. "It wasn't your fault. After all, nobody could have seen this coming." The fire captain walked out after he and the other firefighters managed to de-escalate the situation, so Roxanne hurriedly approached him. Colby still had more to say, but the woman before him was already gone. Staring blankly at where Roxanne stood, Colby seemed somewhat displeased with his face hardening. "Hi. Is the situation serious? Do you know what caused the fire?" questioned Roxanne anxiously, standing before the captain. After wiping the sweat off his face, the captain frowned while shaking his head. We can't tell just yet. It won't be easy to find the cause since institutes like yours are usually filled with flammable materials. To make things worse, the materials mentioned were already reduced to ashes. Roxanne was disappointed when she heard the reply but thanked the captain anyway. Thank you for your help. To that, the captain nodded indifferently. It's our duty. Something is not right. After confirming that the fire was put out and getting the green light from the firemen, Roxanne was finally able to get near the research institute that was engulfed in an inferno. Her heart sank the moment she managed to get a closer look. She had been worried sick all morning, overcome by the apprehension that the medicinal herbs that she had just retrieved the day before were all gone. Alas! Her worst nightmare came true. The very store that caught on fire was the one where the medicinal herbs were stored. Not only were the medicinal herbs the batch that they had just retrieved the day before destroyed, but the other medicinal herbs they previously stocked up were also burned to ashes. Fortunately, Colby had managed to call for help in time and managed to stop the fire from spreading to other areas. Standing beside Roxanne, Colby found himself to be at a loss for words as he stared at the shambles before them. Roxanne let out a soft sigh. Well, luckily no one was hurt, and the fire didn't spread to other areas of the research institute. Colby sighed and said in a defeated manner, "There goes the hard work you guys did yesterday. It took them the whole morning to move all the herbs into the store." Moreover, Colby knew that it must have been difficult for Roxanne and Jack to get the herbs from Herbscape Group in the first place. Roxanne furrowed her brows in response. It would be difficult to get her hands on medicinal herbs of the same quality. Nonetheless, that was the least of her concern right then. She turned to look at Colby and said, "Dr. Galloway, could you please investigate the root cause of the fire at the research institute?" If it was due to the flammable nature of the herbs, Roxanne knew there was nothing she could have done to prevent the disaster. However, if someone had deliberately set the place on fire, she knew she had to expel the culprit from the research institute. Colby immediately led a group of people to the surveillance room. Meanwhile, Roxanne sought the firemen's help to locate the ignition source. However, they couldn't find anything after looking for quite some time. We seldom encounter cases of research institutes catching on fire. However, more often than not, it is due to inappropriate storage of medicinal herbs, a fireman commented. Perhaps the fire at your research institute is also due to the same reason. Roxanne reckoned that the ignition source must have burned away in the fire under such circumstances. That would explain the reason they couldn't locate the ignition source. Despite feeling that something was off, Roxanne could only nod along doubtfully to the fireman's remarks as she thanked him. The fireman returned to his post afterward. The chief fireman bade goodbye to Roxanne and left with his team. Roxanne and the staff of the research institute were left at the entrance of the research institute. She remained unconvinced by the fireman's conclusion. However, since they couldn't locate the ignition source, the fireman might be right. Then again, the research institute had always been fine, and there were only the usual few types of medicinal herbs in store. The staff in charge of the store were all experienced as well. Thus, Roxanne was baffled by the fact that they would commit a mistake that could lead to a fire at the store. Utterly confounded, Roxanne was overcome with frustration. After some time, she turned around to face the staff who had all been standing behind her with a solemn look on her face. "Who was the first one to arrive here in the morning?" she asked. Someone replied in a small voice, "It was Dr. Galloway. He's the one holding the keys, and he's always the first to arrive and unlock the entrance for us every morning." Roxanne frowned slightly, plagued by a gnawing feeling that something was not right. According to the staff, nobody else would have access to the research institute even if they arrived first, seeing as only Colby had the keys. Then again, what could be Colby's motif? Moreover, he was the one to report the fire to the authorities. Roxanne found it incredulous that Colby would do something like this. "The surveillance cameras are down." After a moment of contemplation, Roxanne suppressed her suspicion toward Colby and scanned the group of staff in front of her. "Have you guys carried out the scheduled periodic inspections on the herbs and store lately?" she asked. The staff in charge of the inspection last week hurriedly took a step forward. "I inspected every single storeroom last week, and I've only left after confirming that everything was in order," he replied. Roxanne took a closer look at the man, and she recognized him as one of the experienced staff of the Research Institute. Hence, she had no doubt of his work ethic. Every staff present knew the inappropriate storage of medicinal herbs could put the entire lab in peril. Hence, nobody dared to take the matter lightly. However, if there was indeed no problem with the storage of the herbs as claimed by the staff, why would the store suddenly catch on fire? The more Roxanne thought about it, the more befuddled she was. Hence, she merely nodded at the staff's explanation. Now that the fire has been put out, other areas in the Research Institute are now safe. Do proceed to your respective workstations and resume work, she added. Then, she turned around and headed for the surveillance room. It would appear as if only the surveillance room had the answers she was looking for. Afraid that Colby might have sensed something, Roxanne hastened her pace. She bumped right into Colby, who was heading out of the surveillance room when she arrived. As the two of them locked gaze with each other, Roxanne's heart sank. Colby was wearing a gloomy expression. It was as if he hadn't found out anything useful from the footage. "Did you find out anything?" Nonetheless, Roxanne decided to try her luck and asked. Colby frowned and shook his head. "I didn't see anything." Roxanne knitted her brows. "Well, I think it's better for you to see for yourself," Colby replied grimly. Then, he led Roxanne into the room. She stood before the control center and tried to access the footage in the morning. The crease between her brows deepened the longer she looked at the footage. There was nothing but black smoke in the footage. It seemed like the store didn't catch on fire just that morning. The fire could have started way earlier in the wee hours of the night. "Can we have a look at some earlier footage?" Roxanne turned to Colby and asked. He shook his head helplessly. "For unknown reasons, the surveillance cameras were down from yesterday afternoon till this morning," he explained. Then, Colby started to retrieve the footage. There was nothing but static on the screen. It would appear that the surveillance cameras had indeed malfunctioned. Roxanne felt her heart sank yet again. Even though she trusted the staff and believed that they had no reason to sabotage the Research Institute, it was clear as day that someone had deliberately tampered with the surveillance cameras. After some time, Roxanne nodded at Colby and said, "All right. Let's get out of here. Colby nodded and turned off the footage. A cold glint fleeted across his eyes as he watched her leave. When Roxanne turned around to rush him, however, the cold glint in his eyes was gone. "Have you found out what happened?" he asked. Roxanne kept her eyes low, unable to conceal her distress. "No. I have to ask around and find out what happened." Roxanne felt a heavy weight bearing down on her chest as she thought about how she would have her answer very soon. Colby didn't ask further questions and followed her all the way to the research area. In the research area, the researchers had just regained their composure from the fire incident earlier and got back to work. When they saw two people walking in, they stopped what they were doing in unison. With a grim expression, Roxanne swept a glance at everyone and asked, "Did anyone come to the research institute yesterday afternoon?" Coincidentally, the surveillance cameras were down, so Roxanne could only assume that someone had gone over at that time. As soon as those words fell, everyone exchanged glances with each other silently. Yesterday was a Sunday. It was such a good opportunity to rest at home. So why would anyone come to the research institute without a reason? Besides, she's asking questions that has something to do with the fire. Even if someone was here, why would they admit it? Suddenly, Roxanne was exuding a fearsome aura as she threw a cold glance at everyone. "I have no desire to suspect anyone here, nor can I think of a reason why an employee at the research institute would do something like this. However, the truth is that the person responsible for the fire is someone from the inside. Hence, I would like to know who that person is. Please step forward and don't cause the other employees unnecessary trouble." After that, she added coldly, "The fire caused a huge loss to the research institute. When I find out who's responsible, I'll have no choice but to press charges. However, if that person is willing to come forward now, I think there's still room for negotiation." Everyone lowered their heads when they saw the look in her eyes. In an instant, pin-drop silence ensued and the only sound left was of the boiling liquid in the research area. Ahem! Colby suddenly cleared his throat to defuse the tension in the air. At that precise moment, one of the male employees shuddered. However, Roxanne didn't notice it because she had shifted her attention toward Colby. Colby started slowly, "I've been hiding something from you. After hearing what you said, I think I ought to spill it. This is for the sake of that person." With that, he raised his head and looked at everyone. He spoke softly, but everyone could hear him clearly. The crowd was taken aback when they heard those words. Judging by Colby's tone, it seems like the person responsible is really someone from the research institute. Realizing what those words meant, everyone quickly turned toward the person next to them, wondering if it was really an inside job. Within those few minutes, all the researchers there became on edge. Seeing that, Roxanne's heart sank. However, she suppressed her anger and waited for Colby to continue. After this, he's most probably going to expose the culprit. I'd like to see just who it was that had done something so heinous to the research institute. Colby cleared his throat once more as if he was giving the culprit the chance to come forward on his own. He then began, "Yesterday afternoon, the moment he started talking, there was a sudden commotion among the employees." Colby's voice trailed away to nothing, and everyone turned to look in the direction of the commotion. "It's me. A scrawny man came forward and stood in front of Roxanne with an apologetic expression. Everyone was dumbfounded when they saw that. Jason! How could that be? Why would Jason do such a thing? He has been working for the research institute for almost a decade. He has contributed so much, the employees murmured among themselves. Likewise, Roxanne was in disbelief. Although I haven't been in the research institute for a long time, I know all of them. The man before me is an experienced employee at the research institute. Besides, he always seemed like an honest man. He doesn't even look like he's capable of doing something like this. I can't think of a reason for his action. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.